Hey guys, it's Thursday, and that means sort of a grab bag YouTube video. And you can see the title of this video, Why Van Jones Needs His Own Show on CNN. And those of you who are following my Twitter feed on the evening of Super Tuesday will kind of know where I'm going with this, because I wasn't one of the people that woke up to the headlines on Wednesday about, Van Jones's powerful, brilliant discussion on American race relations on CNN. I actually watched it while it was happening. And there was nothing brilliant about it. It was absolute. I just felt like CNN, everybody was just backing away from Jeffrey Lord being just I'd say he's an asshole, but that's not giving him enough credit for being a political strategist. Jeffrey Lord was on there for one reason and one reason only, to be a Donald Trump surrogate. And he played the role of Donald Trump exceptionally well, interrupting and insulting everybody who disagreed with him. But with Van Jones, it became particularly controversial because Van Jones didn't take it. Well, the other two people he shouted down just kind of took it. Van Jones sort of saw him coming, and before the whole thing erupted, Jeffrey Lord tried to interrupt Van Jones at least twice, and Van Jones said, "Let me finish, please." And Jeffrey Lord said, "I didn't say anything," and Van Jones, to his credit, said, "You breathed." And everybody watching had seen him interrupting multiple other panelists there, Anderson Cooper doing nothing about it. And it just became this train wreck. It's this typical Trump disease that is affecting mainstream media right now, that nobody knows what to do with Donald Trump. And so everybody is doing exactly the wrong things with Donald Trump, which is letting Donald Trump and his surrogates spread disinformation through mainstream airwaves. And this powerful discussion about race that Van Jones tried to have was perpetually interrupted and derailed by Jeffrey Lord spewing nonsense. I mean, if the thing about Jeffrey Lord's talking points on this issue is that they're all in and of themselves factual. The fact that at one point wings of the Democratic Party, now known as the Dixiecrats, were horrendously racist and tried to stop civil rights, that is absolutely true. But what Van Jones said and Jeffrey Lord denied was they all left the Democratic Party at one point and moved over to the Republican Party. And that's absolutely true. They were led by Strom Thurmond. And I mean, this is documented. It's history. People can look it up. So why Jeffrey Lord would deny this? Well, why? Because he's a political operative. And the weird thing is that at one point, Jeffrey Lord was arguing that the Democratic Party has always been racist and continues to perpetuate the racial divide within America. And by that, it includes North America, because Canadian politics is, like it or not, heavily influenced by what goes on south of the border. And then the next day, they decided to reenact this shit show with two people who were treating Van Jones and Jeffrey Lord like a squabbling married couple. And it was just so condescending to treat Van Jones's position as a black man in America as some sort of difference of opinion with Jeffrey Lord, who pulls that "I don't see color" crap. And I'll get to why that's crap in a bit, but I want to finish this point. Jeffrey Lord then, in that broadcast, because he's appealing to a different a slightly different demographic on that one, he's going from like a nice kindly man and woman team instead of a political, like, Super Tuesday team that was so white even their hair was white. And that's, not a dig at white people. I am a white person. It just becomes very, very obvious what the demographic makeup is of this group when something like this comes up and everyone just gets stunned into silence. They are so afraid that they don't know what to do. And so the next morning, Jeffrey Lord starts talking about how his heroes growing up were Jack and Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King. It's like, I'm sorry, wasn't the Democratic Party always the party of racism? Which fact are we supposed to believe, Jeffrey Lord? Because, well, yes, it's true that, you know, the Dixiecrats have some issues when it comes to race, and now that they're Republicans, they still have issues when it comes to race. But you claim your heroes were the exact same Democrats that are perpetuating the racial divide in America. That's insane. But the issue is that this idea that something that happened 50 years ago is just as relevant as something that's going on right now is, first of all, absurd. Second of all, the issue was not Republicans versus Democrats and who is more racist. The issue was the inherent problems with Donald Trump, single candidate, you know, not all the Republican Party, just Donald Trump. The problem with Donald Trump being unwilling to disavow the endorsement of David Duke, or what people claim was the endorsement, whatever. It's all murky because these things become murky. But, you know, the fact that Donald Trump was not, as Van Jones put it, Donald Trump is not known for being a middle-of-the-road guy. When he is passionate about something, you know it. And normally when he speaks passionately about something, he speaks passionately about terrorism. And in Van Jones' opinion, the Ku Klux Klan is a domestic terrorist organization in the United States who kills black people as an act of terror. And, you know, that it fits the definition. You know, this became the whole thing about, no, the Democrats are really the problem with race in America. And oh yeah, because the KKK is apparently a liberal organization. Like, what? The KKK is allegedly pushing progressive politics as far as Jeffrey Lord is concerned. And at that point, this is CNN. This isn't Jerry Springer. Okay, this is a news channel. When someone starts saying something that is just fundamentally false like that, the host should be able to jump in and say, that's not accurate. That is the job of a host. That is the job of a moderator, to stop people from being able to get away with that BS. Because if it doesn't work that way, then, you know, then pundits, proxies for political candidates, things like they can come on these shows and say whatever they want. There is nothing stopping them from distributing garbage through the mainstream news. I'm reaching for words here. And, you know, the frustrating thing to me is all of a sudden it becomes about race. And race is still relevant in modern day. I don't care what anybody says about a post-racial America. Race is still relevant. And I think that when it comes to a question of race issues, you can't have a panel full of white people telling the lone black person that race does not matter. And by not stopping the garbage and by allowing Jeffrey Lord to continue to interrupt people and, you know, continue to just spew junk, you know, CNN allowed him to just roll over the facts, just paper over the facts in this particular situation. And his claim that the Democrats are the ones that always bring race into the debate and all that stuff, is especially ludicrous when he's talking to Van Jones because of Van Jones's own personal history. A lot of people may not know that Van Jones was a White House appointee, something to do with the environment, the White House Council on Environmental Quality. And Van Jones has also been involved in trying to educate people on police brutality against black people. And we're going back to, like, I believe, like the 1990s, way before Black Lives Matter. Like, this guy's legit when it comes to this issue. He's been dealing with it for a long time. He started something called the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, Bay Area Police Watch, stuff like that. And so he's well informed on this issue, but that's not why he was an Obama appointee. He was an Obama appointee under his other hat, which is environmental quality stuff. And so when he was a White House appointee, Glenn Beck crossed swords with him. It became this thing with him and Glenn Beck because the organization that Van Jones had helped found was criticizing Glenn Beck for basically injecting race into his criticisms of Obama. I think he said something like Obama hates white people or something like that. Oh, here it is. Glenn Beck said that President Obama has a deep-seated hatred for white people or the white culture. And so there was this back and forth, and you know how these things get. They get ugly. And so Glenn Beck and you know, his legions of angry white men, I mean, that's what the revolution driven by Rush Limbaugh and people like that called themselves. They called themselves the angry white men. They found a previous statement, a YouTube video of Jones using it wasn't that long ago. It was 2009, but they claimed this was inappropriate language. He basically said that when they were talking about, like, how did Republicans manage to get things passed without a supermajority, but Democrats couldn't do it. And Van Jones responded, well, the answer to that is they're assholes, as a technical political kind of term. And Barack Obama is not an asshole. Now we'll say this, I can be an asshole, and some of us who are not Barack Hussein Obama are going to have to start getting a little bit uppity. He had to resign after a smear campaign by various people driven by Glenn Beck. He had to resign his position because he used the term assholes. This sounds insane in the era of Donald Trump, presidential candidate, right? I mean, Donald Trump has said way worse just on Twitter. But this guy had to resign, and it all started because of a clash of his former organization with Glenn Beck over Glenn Beck making racially charged statements. So for Jeffrey Lord to say that to Van Jones, of all people, I give Van Jones real credit for not, just getting up and walking out then. And unfortunately, something happened and he left the broadcast. I think they refreshed panelists at the top of the hour, but it was really awkward that shortly after that very heated exchange happened, Van Jones left and was replaced with another black guy who was sitting at the opposite side of the table from Jeffrey Lord. But things like this happen on live television. Anderson Cooper's deer in the headlight moments was not his finest hour. It's not the first time I've seen him do that. For all I know, he had somebody in his earpiece telling him not to interrupt. From a rating standpoint, from a YouTube standpoint, it was probably the right call. From a civil discourse standpoint, it was absolutely the wrong call. And like I said, they allowed factually incorrect disinformation to be spread on their airwaves without correction. That's unacceptable for a news service. But then the next freaking day, Van Jones and Jeffrey Lord are back at it again. And there wasn't just one person interrupting Van Jones when he tried to make very relevant points about not only his own experience as a black man in America, but the sort of collective beliefs of the people he represents. And he can say that because he's not just one person, one voice. He's actually somebody who has founded and chaired these committees and done the work. You know, we need guys like him who have gone out and talked to a lot of people and know what a lot of people think. So nobody else has to go out and talk to all these people. We can just take his word for it. And does he have his biases? Of course. Does he have his sort of axes to grind? Of course. But he's an important voice precisely because he's sort of identified these serious issues decades before many other people did. And so that gives him credibility on this issue, right? I mean, that's how credibility works. You were right before other people were right. But this daytime segment on CNN was worse than the election segment. There were now not, and I joked on Twitter, there were 3 people who didn't want to be referred to as white because Jeffrey Lord kept correcting him every time he said, you know, white person or black person. No, they're just people, Van. They're just people. Which is insulting as anything in this particular context. And, you know, because when it comes to the Ku Klux Klan, no, the Ku Klux Klan does not believe that everyone is just a person. There are black people and there are white people because they kill black people and not white people. So the idea that they're just people is ridiculous in a discussion about a Klan. But it's a talking point that makes, you know, Trump's base feel more comfortable that they're not the problem. The liberal establishment is the problem. The liberal establishment are the real racists. They're just honest, plain-speaking people. And this is something the left and the right both do. They refuse to look at the problems in their own backyard and try to blame their freaking blood feud enemies for all the problems. And I say blood feud because it's like the blood war in the D&D. You have the Batsu and you have the Tanari. They're both evil alignment. One is just chaotic evil and the other is just lawful evil. Like, it's ridiculous. Both parties have corruption. Both parties have checkered past. Both parties have issues. And it's up to the individuals within the different parties to work with whoever they can to correct these problems. Bipartisan support is ideal. And it's harder and harder to get because of guys like Jeffrey Lord who make the criticism of an individual into a criticism of the entire Republican Party, and then he has to throw shade on the entire Democratic Party for things that happened over 50 years ago. It's ridiculous. But the morning segment was worse because the 2 hosts were, you know, helpfully trying to interject what I think they thought were supportive messages. But all they were really doing was interrupting Van Jones and giving him less talk time. And I would have rather, if this was going to be a rematch between the 2 of them, you know, shape the conversation. Do not interject your own opinions into this conversation to other people who have nothing invested in this. You know, when, just so you guys know, when a white person is pulling that there are no black people, there are no white people, that there are just people, that's a really nice thing to say, but it is sort of like Jeffrey Lord was having a big privilege moment there, because it's real easy for a white person to say that there's just people in America. You know, when everything from the education gap to the wage gap to all these other things show, no, there are very much meaningful racial divides in America still. And it's not just about black people and white people. It's about Asian Americans and Hispanic Americans, Latino Americans, and then, poor South Asian people, they get left out of everything. They're like this minority that doesn't count. It's so bizarre. But, there's a real struggle for the soul of the Republican Party right now. And it's a real shame that CNN has chosen to stack its panel with just obvious operatives from from active Republican candidates, not just Republicans who are allowed to have their own opinions. I mean, they had what was her name, Amanda Carpenter or something like that, who used to be like part of Ted Cruz's campaign, and then you've got this Jeffrey Lord guy who is actively pro-Trump. Like, where are the just analysts for the Republican side? They had plenty of sort of neutral observer Democrats. You know, David Axelrod was there calling Hillary Clinton horribly unlikable, but he's supported Hillary Clinton. Like, it's weird. You know, there were people who were analyzing the thing instead of going, yay, my candidate. Whereas the Republicans they had on CNN were clearly biased towards one of the participants. And that is not news. That is politics. You're supposed to report the news, not allow more free advertising for Donald freaking Trump. And that's what they're doing every time they have one of these skirmishes. It is more media time for Donald Trump. And they're doing it on the back of Van Jones. And I mean, okay, he agreed to be a part of the second segment, but I see, you know, his thought, because he probably gets paid every time he does a bit on CNN, because he's just a correspondent now. He doesn't have the show. So he has to subject himself to this nonsense whenever he wants to get a paycheck and make his point. Now, I think because this is now 2 back-to-back instances where he was not able to really get his point across because it was being interrupted by not just Jeffrey Lord, but in the case of that morning segment, the 2 other hosts as well. It was really bad. It was really imbalanced talk time. You could feel it. Every time he started to finally get to make his point, he got interrupted by somebody. And I think that CNN needs someone who is a Van Jones to be able to talk about these issues for people, you know, who may care about these issues but don't actually understand the viewpoint of Black America. I think that he needs, you know, maybe not a weekly show, but maybe monthly specials, something, you know, that are available also on YouTube for people who are actually interested and want the information, not to be told how to think, just want the information. They should be able to access that, and CNN as a news network has a responsibility as journalists to inform people on one of the most important issues of American politics going forward post-Obama. Because now we're in this phase of, okay, we had the first Black president. He was just, okay, now what? Right? You know, because Obama's going to be one of those, it's going to be really interesting to see how Obama is remembered, because history tends to be kinder to people than the headlines are. But, you know, all those people who criticized Obama for getting it too young and not being ready were right. The Republicans ran up one side of him and down the other his first term. And the fact that, you know, Van Jones resigned. No, he didn't. It was considered not politically advantageous for the administration. And Van Jones wasn't the only one. They threw so many people under the bus trying to just, no, we're different. They sold out their friends. And, you know, that is something that he's going to be judged by. That is a weakness in leadership. You stand by the people who stand by you. And you take a couple political knocks, especially, you know, it was 2009. You know, that was before the midterms, so they freaking lost everything. But, you know, I get it. But he's still got to be criticized for that. And he was much more effective as sort of the role of the president, as sort of a figurehead leader or a philosophical leader in the U.S. government. He was much more effective that way his second term. And Van Jones was right that, you know, it's charged language, but Obama needed to get a little bit uppity. He was absolutely right on that. Obama needed to be the president, not the Black president. He needed to stop thinking so much about that and just be himself. But that's easy for me to say. I'm not Black, right? But this is the thing. Now what? Because it's going to be a while, right? And one guy in the presidency doesn't really change the fact that the rest of government in the U.S. does not have really great racial representation. Who are going to be the advocates in government now for people who very much need them? this is a serious question. It's a question that we're dealing with in Canada right now. We're dealing with it in a different way. The government ran on the idea of gender parity in cabinet. They have more people of color in cabinet, although it's still not representative of the country. But they decided to do it through appointments because it's a much longer process to cultivate candidates that then get elected. And I can talk about this later, but for now, I want to wrap this up soon. But part of that conversation is having the conversation, and part of what those appointments did, which were controversial in some spheres, but no matter what you think about that, it got people talking. It got people discussing the issue. And I think Van Jones has a similar role to play in the US because he is experienced, and he's not somebody who was a musician or an actor that now got involved in politics. He's not some film director, He's a guy who got involved. He's been politically active his whole life. He has causes outside of civil rights. This guy knows how government works. He knows how politics works. And I think he has a lot of important things to say. But if what happened Tuesday night and Wednesday morning is any indication, he needs his own show to actually be able to say it. And that's sad, but it's true. So I hope he gets some specials. I hope he even YouTube things. Like, just give him 15 minutes on YouTube every so often. Just talk about this issue and help us to understand, because there are the policies and there are the statistics and all that. And that's one part of it, and that's very important. But there is an emotional component. There is a perception component that the only way we can understand it if we're not Black people is to listen to Black people. And that's the part that I think shows like Blackish did extremely well. Other works of art continue to try to do it. But I think it's a different kind of powerful when someone who's not part of Hollywood has the opportunity to tell his story and the stories of other people as well. I think that hearing the voices of these individuals who speak very well and speak very powerfully give us an insight into understanding that we can't get any other way. And it's really important because there's no shortcut to empathy, right? And the only way we can have empathy with Black America is if we listen to Black America. And the only way we get to listen to Black America is if we let Black America talk. And so there, Van Jones should have his own show. That's my opinion.